Welcome to Keep It Clean for Happier You. I'm your host, Nikki Tamboulidis. Thank you for joining the conversation on how you and I can make a positive impact on our environment at home and on a global scale. Yes, we can. Here is how. Thanks everyone for joining us, and many thanks to our guests. I'm your host, Nikki. What are we talking about? Our topic, how to save money and reduce waste. From earth.org, the top 6 environmental issues the U.S. is facing in 2024: air pollution, water shortages, wildfires, food waste, and plastic pollution. Today, we tackle food waste and plastic pollution. Food waste in America has skyrocketed and counts as the second highest country in the world for food waste per capita after Australia. We throw away 103 million tons a day, comes to 1 pound of food discarded by each one of us. I'm guilty as charged too. Ironically, 12.8 of U.S. households experienced food insecurity in 2022, which means over 43 million people. For solutions and to start the conversation, we invited 2 experts, Cheryl Baldwin and Rachel Schnabel. Welcome and thank you for being here. In a few words, tell us about you and your background. Cheryl, we'll start with you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. So, as you said, I work for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I work on a number of initiatives there. I do the What's In, What's Out program for the department and Recycle CT, educating people about recycling. And I also talk a lot about food waste solutions and how we can reduce the amount of food waste we generate. And I'm also looking at how we can do more around food waste prevention and food recovery, which is the reuse of food.
Yeah, Rachel?
Hi, Rachel Schnabel. I'm the Recycling and Community Service Coordinator for the town of Manchester. My job is largely funded by the surcharge on nip bottles, the miniature liquor bottles. So with that, the focus of those funds are to focus on litter mitigation and management, but also to find ways to minimize the creation of waste.
Very interesting. So we have the right people here for solutions, guys. And I have a very important question for both of the ladies that so many people are asking me. What is composting? And I'm going to start with Cheryl.
All right. Well, the way that I look at the definition is it's taking organic materials and having them break down into a soil-like substance. So what are organic materials? Organic materials are leaves or grass clippings and other yard debris. Could also include your food scraps, anything from banana peels to your eggshells and leftover coffee grounds. And it's in a controlled environment, and it's aerobic, meaning it's with oxygen. And the soil-like substance we often call finished compost. Some people call it black gold because if you're a gardener, you know exactly what it is.
Rachel?
Oh, Cheryl said that perfectly. The only thing I'd like to add is at home I do backyard composting, and one thing that I've been experimenting with is what other things can I put into compost that people don't normally think about. So my husband and I, we've been experimenting with a floss that's actually, it's made with corn silk. And so we're able to compost it when we're done with it.
You mean dental floss?
Yes.
Wow,
No,
fascinating.
really?
Yes.
That is so interesting. I would never think that.
But it's a particular type of dental floss because most of our dental floss is actually a plastic. So
Correct.
You're using, wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and it comes in a little glass bottle with a metal cap. However, the glass bottle is really small, so I have to ask our sorting facilities if it's okay to recycle it. Because when I've talked with them about miniature liquor bottles, they said it's so small that they can't crush it. Part of those recycling processes, they crush the glass.
Yes.
And when it's a really small glass container, it's so sturdy that it can't be crushed. So I think I'm going to go in the direction of reusing these little, they look like vials.
How interesting. Why should I compost? Is there a benefit to me personally? Is somebody going to pay me to do this?
So when I do
That's
composting
Cheryl.
workshops, I usually pose that question, actually, because I think why you compost is going to impact how you compost. So some people compost because they're gardeners and they're looking for like the best high nutrient material. Well, if that's the case, you're going to be very careful in how you compost. You're going to be pretty meticulous. I am a lazy composter. I just throw things in. It reduces my waste. I have less materials I have to put out on the curb. And I don't really turn it that much. I also don't have really great finished product, but I'm okay using it for landscaping. So when the question is posed, some people are gardeners, and so they're trying to create finished compost. Some are about reducing waste. Some understand that we have issues with waste going into landfills or waste incineration or waste energy facilities, and they don't want to do that. There's a lot of environmental reasons. Sometimes people do it to reduce the cost of their trash. There are a lot of communities looking at unit-based pricing, which I can talk about later if you want. And what that means is that they are paying directly for the amount of trash that they generate. And so by composting, they can reduce that cost.
Rachel, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess I'll chime in with the cost piece. From a municipal standpoint, one of the things that we're noticing with trash, and I'm sure Cheryl can say way more about this, but there was a trash to energy plant in Hartford that closed down 2 years ago, and they were taking in a substantial amount of trash for Connecticut, including trash from my town, the town of Manchester. And so since they have closed, our trash is now going out of state, mainly to Pennsylvania and Ohio. So not only are we being reliant on on other states to dispose of our trash, but there's also that carbon footprint with sending it out of state, and costs are starting to go up. So as the cost of disposing of our trash goes up, it's becoming more affordable to dispose of food waste separately because it's being turned into a resource. It's being turned into compost. And so it's less expensive to dispose of food waste. Now, there's still a cost associated with disposing of it from the municipal side because there's the cost of hauling it. Energy goes into creating the compost. But what's interesting about the kind of compost that is being created at the facilities that we send the food waste to is that it's an anaerobic process. So as Cheryl was talking about earlier, your backyard composting, that's aerobic. That's with oxygen. That's why you have to turn your pile.
And the one you're talking about is without oxygen.
Correct. And the reason they want to do that is because when the bacteria is breaking down the food waste, instead of creating carbon dioxide, it's creating methane. And these facilities, they're completely enclosed, and they capture that methane, which is sometimes referred to as biogas, and it can be used as energy. So not only are they creating compost, but they're also creating energy. And because of the type of process that they're creating this compost, they're able to accept different types of foods that you can't put in your backyard composting. So
like
meat, fat, dairy, things that if you put it in your backyard composting, it's going to become an anaerobic process. It's going to become smelly. It's going to attract wildlife. Whereas normally, if you do it right, it shouldn't attract wildlife.
My friend that I was telling you, I was talking to Rachel and Cheryl before we started the show, and I was talking to them about a Greek friend of mine that she does gardening, and she has composting in different areas, and she showed it to me. And there was not a fly in sight, which I was shocked. She does the food scraps, and then she does trimmings from her lawn, and then food scraps. And then when she wants to get compost, she goes all the way in the bottom. Like she said, this is 3 years old. She showed me one is younger, 2 years old. So I was fascinated because I never even know about this.
Yeah, so decomposition is really fascinating. So when you have a compost pile, it's usually the inside and the bottom of the pile that is most active.
Yes.
Just like anaerobic, you have microbial activity for the aerobic. It's just different microbes doing different things. and they break it down with the oxygen. If you turn your pile, the whole thing is going to break down.
So you're not supposed to turn it?
No, you want to turn it to get
You
air
want to turn it.
for
This
your
is how
home
much I know,
composting
guys. I'm
system.
so happy we have these people here.
Yeah,
Cheryl
so
and Rachel.
when you're thinking about
education
composting,
is key.
when you're thinking about composting, it's really easy. Where I think about that, when you're creating a compost pile, you're creating a home, if you will, for microorganisms. And you have to think about, what do those microorganisms need to be able to do what they do, which is break down our food scraps and other materials. They need oxygen, they need moisture or water, and they need a location, and then they need food. And so the food is the stuff that we give them. Oxygen is the turning. Moisture is because if they dry out, they're not going to live and thrive as much as they need to. So you need to make sure that your compost is moist, not wet. If it's wet, it goes anaerobic. And so also a space, in the sense that you don't need it to be in a sunny place, but you want it in a place that's not going to get waterlogged. Because if you had, you went back to your friend and you went to one of her active piles and you put your hand in it, it would be hot. Because microorganisms give off heat as a byproduct of their decomposition.
And
so,
Cheryl, I'm planning to do that. Educating me, my God, and everyone else that's listening. My God, thank you, ladies. You're listening to Keep It Clean for Happier You podcast. To listen anytime, go to dirtdirtgoaway.com. Also, you can live stream online at radio1400.am every Saturday. Now, I'm very interested with what Rachel was talking about, that you can, I didn't know, I guess total ignorance that is, that you can compost meat and you can actually provide energy in a way.
Yeah, by the food scrap drop-off program. So we have a facility in Southington, Quantum Biopower. So that's one of the places where our food waste is sent to. Another place is Vanguard in Agawam, Massachusetts. They're both about equally as close from our town, so the hauler has the option to send it to either place. And they're able to compost in this way. If you wanted to be really creative and compost those kinds of foods at home.
So there's lots of ways. So there's the ability of composting, and then there's also annoying your neighbors, right? So there's two different things. So I do compost meat scraps in mine, but I also have a lot of leaves. And when you can encapsulate the odors, you're not going to attract animals. I also live in an urban environment, so honestly, the biggest animal that bothers me are blue jays. But if you live in Simsbury, I would not encourage you to do anything like that, because they have problems just with vegetables and food scraps, even when they bury things, because we have, the increased number of bears in the state.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. And so, but I wanted to back up too and mention that what is happening in Manchester is really sort of a new trend and a new craze, if you will, which is very exciting.
Thanks to Rachel.
Well, it's a lot of towns, municipalities are now collecting food scraps and then collecting them at their local transfer station. And sometimes residents also have access to food scraps collection curbside. And so I think it's about a quarter, maybe 28% of our towns now offer some type of food scraps collection. So people can compost at home, which is fantastic. But if that's not something that you want to do, there are more and more opportunities to collect food scraps and have them sent to a facility like what's happening in Manchester. Some towns actually compost the materials on site. Ridgefield and Newtown is starting a program. And so there's a lot of interesting activities that are happening. Yeah.
I wanted to mention another friend. I have a lot of people that I know that she started doing composting at home. Even though she has a big yard, she doesn't have any garden or anything. And the company would come and pick up the food scraps once a week.
Do you mean the food scraps?
The food scraps.
Yeah.
And finally, the 3 teenager kids convinced her that it stinks and that's not something that they should be doing, and they scrapped the whole scrap program. So I want to mention something about, because you picking up what Cheryl was talking about, the meat and covering it. What is the options that somebody that lives in an apartment? I live in an apartment, in a condo. What are the options about the stink of the scraps?
Right. So a couple things to keep in mind. For our program, we give the residents a food scrap pail. What's neat about it is when you move the handle in the upright position, it sort of locks the lid. So that can help to some level with critters. Some people prefer to keep the pail in their kitchen so it's easily accessible. Some have a little kitchen top container and they empty it in the pail, and they might keep the pail in the basement, in the garage, or outdoors. In the summer heat is when the smell is going to be the worst. It's mainly going to be when you open it. But what you can do is, for the foods that you know are going to have the greatest smell, you can keep a container in your freezer for those foods. And then when you know you're ready to drop off the food waste or have it collected, then you can empty those foods into the container.
Do you know, I love this idea, because in Greece, that's what my parents do, because they pick up they live, majority of Greek people live in apartments because the country is small. And instead of having meat or anything that smells, they put it in the freezer. And then when it's garbage day, I find that fascinating, Rachel, that you suggested that, because that's what people in Europe do. So they don't stink up their houses or their apartments. They put it in the freezer.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is food waste, if you don't separate it out, it's going to be in your trash, and your trash is going to stink. So that odor's there regardless. One thing that's new that I've recently learned about that I want to explore more for Manchester is there's a new type of pail that is completely vented. It almost looks like a mini hamper,
yes,
like for your laundry.
Yes.
And so what I learned this from the towns of Glastonbury and Somers. And what they're telling residents to do is, if you have anything soupy, liquidy, dump it down the drain. And what happens is, when you put your food scraps into this kind of bin, because it's so aerated, the food dries out and it doesn't smell at all.
So do you leave it in the kitchen, or you put it in the garage or something? Or
yeah. What I got to do more research on it, but
right.
I would assume you could leave it in the kitchen.
Maybe they should come up with some kind of a filter, or no? Food scraps.
Sometimes if you have a trash can in your kitchen, why can't you have a compost bin? That's all, or a food scraps collection bin.
Yeah.
I have one on my kitchen counter.
You do?
Yeah. And I empty it a lot.
I will say one thing about having something with a filter. So I, at one point, had a countertop container that had a carbon filter on the lid. So it was still aerated, but the carbon filter kept the smell out. The reason that didn't work for me is because I couldn't see the food waste in it, so it wasn't prompting me to empty it regularly.
Okay.
And so the food waste was staying in there long enough that it actually ate away at the metal container and made holes in the bottom. Oh, wow. I kid you not. But that's for me who's doing backyard composting.
Yes.
If you're having your food waste picked up regularly or dropping it off regularly, you might already be prompted to empty it regularly. So that might not be a problem.
Because you're already doing outside, so you have a lot of
flexibility.
Exactly, Rachel.
I have heard of people sprinkling a little bit of baking soda on top, too, after a stinky meal or something. Yep. But not necessarily, and you wouldn't want to do a lot, because baking soda has a lot of salt in it, which isn't good for the finished compost.
What I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the one-stream recycling? Cheryl, you start first to give us your input about what it is, first of all.
Okay, so
the definition.
For those of a certain age, will remember that we used to just collect newspapers, and we would tie them and bundle them up. And then, all of a sudden, we were allowed to do magazines too, but they had to be separate, right? We had to bundle those up separately. We also collected glass bottles, and often we had to change those, switch those up by color. And then things started to change. they started combining all of our containers. We had something called dual stream, where you had bottles and cans in one container, and then you had paper in the other. And paper included cardboard, newsprint, etc. And some towns had a collection one week they did bottles and cans, the other week they did paper. Some towns, they had both. And then a lot of folks in rural areas that go to transfer stations just brought everything to the transfer station. And then the industry started figuring out, how can we still capture the materials and capture it for value so we can sell it as to end markets, still recycle it, if you will, but make it easier picking everything up. And it's the industry that actually came up with this concept of, quote unquote, single stream. And single stream just meant that you took your bottles and cans and you took your paper and you put them in one container. It's also when a lot of towns started moving towards these things called carts, where you had these carts with wheels. And the reason they went with carts with wheels is, believe it or not, it actually reduced claims for workman's comp.
Huh.
Because you had
Also,
garbage collectors who would have to take cans and lift them. And then recycling people had to lift those little 18-gallon blue boxes and lift them. And that's a lot of lifting. A lot of lifting. And so you had a lot of folks who had challenges because of the weight, especially for the trash cans. And so by moving to carts, it actually made it a lot easier and safer for the garbage men and women that work in the industry.
Cheryl, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have a question. When you say the carts, are you meaning those big plastic on wheels, the green?
That's right.
Yes, I just want to make sure.
Some people call them toters, but
Yeah,
that's also like calling tissue Kleenex. It's a brand name. And
I just a layperson. I just want to make sure that...
That's exactly it. They come in different sizes, but ultimately what would happen is, in many cases, we have men and women rolling those carts off to the garbage truck, and then it lifts it and empties it.
Yes.
Sometimes we actually have the truck have a claw, and it pulls up to the curb, and then it lifts up the container and then empties it. So that made it easier to have this thing called single stream. Connecticut is trying to get away from that term. They really want to use it as mixed recycling, because when different towns started going into a single stream for recycling, people started thinking they could recycle anything. There was not a lot of education. Some towns educated, some towns were not, didn't have the capacity. They didn't have a Rachel. And a lot of towns got confused about what was in and what was out, what was acceptable, what was not. And that's why we created the What's In, What's Out program, because it wasn't clear what was accepted, because single stream implies everything goes into one. But it doesn't. You have a trash can for trash. You have a recycling bin for your bottles, cans, and paper. And then, of course, a lot of towns also have the bin now for food scraps, which is great.
So, Rachel, does it help or hurt recycling when you have one stream recycling? Because education, what Cheryl said, it's vital, because people put a lot of things they're not supposed to on the one stream.
That's a very tricky question. I think having mixed recycling, it makes things a lot easier, so people are more likely to do
recycle.
It. Yeah, there's been a lot of research done on things like recycling, where people want to do the right thing, but it has to be easy, or else they won't do it. So in that regard, I think mixed recycling is very helpful. It's not something I grew up with. I actually grew up in the state of Maine. I've lived in Connecticut for just over 11 years, but in Maine, I was in a rural town. We brought everything to the transfer station.
Yeah.
And so it was a very different situation.
In Maine, I think they're very advanced with recycling, with their programs, because I was reading it hits number one in the whole country as being the place to recycle. And I mean, if you Google it, you'll see Maine is number one.
However, it's important to note that we've had mandatory recycling since 1991, which predates even California.
Cheryl.
And I'm not from Connecticut. I'm just saying, go Connecticut. The big state.
You guys are wonderful because you're educating me, because the things you're saying, it's like I have no idea. So I'm sure all our listeners are being educated right now, because education is key to know what's what.
For having us.
Thank you for taking time off from Saturday. It's Saturday we're taping this. And this ladies, Cheryl Baldwin and Rachel Schnabel, they took time off to come here and educate all of us. And I'm grateful to both of you. Thank you so much.
Environment.
Join us next week as we continue our conversation with our guests. We came to the end of the show. Keep it clean for happier you. I'm your host, Nikki Tamboulidis. Together with my team, we're working on more exciting conversations on how each one of us can make a difference at home and on a global scale. Yes, we can. Bye for now.
At Keep It Clean for Happier You, we'd love to hear from you. For your comments and questions, use contact form at dirtdirtgoaway.com or text Nikki, text only, at 203-581-3446. That's 203-581-3446. We will be here every Saturday. Tune in to Keep It Clean for Happier You podcast. You can live stream online at radio1400.am every Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. and listen anytime at dirtdirtgoaway.com.